Hello everyone, welcome to Love Wave's story. I was standing in my kitchen in my robe, half awake, coffee already burning my tongue, when my phone suddenly buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No photo, no name, just one sentence saying, "You don't know me, but you deserve the truth," and my first instinct was to delete it because spam is everywhere. But before I could even lock the screen, another message came in saying, "He didn't marry you for love." And my stomach dropped so fast I had to grab the counter to stay steady. I read it again and again, hoping I misunderstood something. Then I typed, "Wrong number," because that's what you do when reality feels too dangerous to accept. But she replied immediately with, "I wish it was," and I actually laughed out loud, nervous, shaky laughter, because I'd been married for 6 years and my marriage was calm, stable, no screaming fights, no cheating scandals, no obvious red flags. My husband was boring in the safest way, predictable, loyal, reliable. So I told her to stop. I told her she was cruel. I told her she had the wrong woman, and then she sent a screenshot. It was a photo of a legal document with my husband's full name, his signature, and a date that made my chest tighten because it was 3 months before we met, and suddenly I felt cold, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I typed, "What is this?" and she didn't answer right away. That pause terrified me more than the messages themselves. Then she finally wrote, "It's the contract that paid for your marriage." My hand started shaking and I wanted to call my husband immediately, but something stopped me, a quiet voice in my head telling me not to warn him yet. So instead I asked her who she was, and she replied, "I'm the woman who walked away so you could marry him." And in that moment I understood this wasn't about an affair or jealousy. It was about a deal, and my entire marriage suddenly felt like a lie I'd been living inside of. I stared at her last message for a long time. My phone felt heavier in my hand, like it was carrying someone else's life inside it, and I finally asked her what kind of deal she was talking about because none of this made sense to me. But instead of answering, she sent another screenshot, this time an email thread filled with dates, names, legal phrases I barely understood. Yet my eyes locked onto one thing immediately: my husband's email address, the same one I'd seen him type so casually at our kitchen table. And then she wrote that sentence I still hear in my head: "He needed a wife, not a relationship." My heart started pounding so hard it felt physical. I told her this had to be fake, that emails can be edited, that anyone can lie, and she replied calmly, almost sadly, saying she told herself the exact same thing at first. Then she sent a voice message, and the moment I heard her voice I froze because she didn't sound angry or dramatic. She sounded tired, worn down, like someone who had carried this for too long. She said she had been with him for 4 years before me, that they had plans, timelines, even talked about kids. But then one day everything shifted. He became obsessed with documents, money, appearances, deadlines. She said he told her he had an opportunity that required a perfect public image, a stable marriage, the right kind of woman, and she didn't fit the profile. She said he offered her money to leave quietly and sign papers that would keep her silent. And when she refused, he finally admitted that marriage for him was strategic, useful, profitable, not emotional. And while she was being paid to disappear, I was meeting his parents, being introduced to friends, falling in love with a version of him that had been carefully constructed just for me. I asked her why she was telling me this now after all these years, and she said because she recently found out he renewed the agreement. And when I asked her what agreement she meant, she answered, "The on." I asked her to explain what she meant by profitable because my brain refused to process that word next to my marriage, and she said my husband worked with a private consulting firm that specialized in image building for high-level clients, politicians, investors, men who needed to look stable, trustworthy, family-oriented. She said marriage was part of the package, not fake exactly, but controlled, structured, useful, and the wife had to meet very specific criteria without knowing the real reason. I felt my chest tighten because she was describing me without even trying: my education, my clean past, my quiet personality, my lack of drama. Everything suddenly sounded like bullet points on a checklist. I told her she was insane, that this sounded like a movie plot. But she sent me another document. This one hurt the most. It was a background report on me dated 2 weeks after our first date: my address, my work history, my student loans, even a note about my relationship with my parents. I remember sliding down the kitchen cabinet onto the floor because my legs stopped working. I asked her how she got this and she said she wasn't supposed to, but when she walked away she took copies because she needed proof one day. She said she tried to forget, to move on, but then she saw our wedding photos online, saw my smile, saw how real it looked, and it broke something in her. she said she didn't hate me. She hated herself for letting him replace her so easily, and she hated him for turning love into a transaction. I asked her what he got out of marrying me specifically, and she said stability contracts, tax advantages, access to investors who only trusted married men. She said my role wasn't to love him, it was to legitimize him, and I sat there on the floor realizing that every anniversary dinner, every family photo, every quiet night on the couch had been part of someone else's strategy, not my life, and for the first time I wondered if my husband had ever actually chosen M. After reading that, I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked around the house touching things like I needed to confirm they were real, our couch, our photos, the mug with his stupid inside joke printed on it, and all I could think was how perfectly normal everything looked while my head was falling apart. She kept typing, saying she debated for months whether to contact me because she knew once I knew, there was no going back, and I asked her why now, what changed exactly, and she told me she recently got contacted by the same consulting firm again, asking her to sign an updated silence clause because my husband's profile was rising and they wanted to make sure no loose ends existed. That phrase made me feel sick. Loose ends, like people were threads you just cut. She said that's when she realized I was still inside this without consent, without knowledge, and she couldn't live with that anymore. I asked her if he knew she was talking to me and she said no, not yet, but he would find out eventually because everything in his life was monitored, planned, scheduled, even reactions. She warned me not to confront him immediately, saying men like him don't panic, they pivot, they deny, they reframe, and suddenly I started replaying past moments in my head, how calm he always was during arguments, how nothing ever really rattled him, how he never lost control, which I once thought was emotional maturity, but now felt like training. I remembered how our proposal was perfectly timed, right after he closed a major deal, how our wedding date was moved twice for work reasons, how he insisted on certain photos, certain guests, certain angles, and I realized I had mistaken precision for care, control for love, and the scariest part was that I didn't know if he ever felt anything real for me at all, or if I was just the final piece that made the picture complete. That night I didn't confront him. I smiled, cooked dinner, asked about his day, and the whole time my chest felt tight like I was acting in my own life. Every word I said sounded rehearsed even though it wasn't. He talked about meetings, timelines, future plans, and when he said, "We're in a really good place right now," I had to look down so he wouldn't see my face. Later when he fell asleep, I took his phone from the nightstand with shaking hands. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I went through emails, calendars, cloud folders, and that's when I found it, a shared drive labeled simply personal. Inside were documents, reports, charts, all about him, his public image, his risk assessment, his growth trajectory, and then a subfolder with my name on it. Seeing my own name there felt like being punched. Inside were notes about me, how I presented in public, how often I posted online, how my reactions came across in photos, even suggestions like, encourage organic affection, avoid conflict visibility. I felt numb scrolling through it. This wasn't a marriage, it was a project. I found monthly reports noting milestones, anniversaries, family events, and comments like, positive optics, and, strong domestic narrative, and then I saw a document titled, Renewal, Year 7, dated just 2 weeks ago. My throat went dry as I opened it, and that's when I understood why she reached out now. Because my marriage wasn't ending, it was being extended. I barely slept that night. Every time he shifted next to me I felt like a stranger was in my bed, and by morning I had already decided I wouldn't scream or cry or accuse him, not yet. Because if this was a system, I needed to understand it before trying to break it, so I played my role perfectly. I kissed him goodbye, wished him luck on his presentation, even fixed his tie like I always did. Then the second he left I called the woman again. This time my voice was steady in a way that scared me. I told her I found the files, and she went quiet for a long moment before saying she was sorry, not for telling me, but for knowing how much it would hurt. She said the renewal meant his image was being elevated to a level where any instability could cost millions, and that wives like me were considered assets that needed maintenance, not happiness. She said the firm usually encouraged emotional attachment because it made the role more believable, but real autonomy was discouraged, and that sentence hit me harder than anything else, because it explained so much. Why he supported my hobbies but never my risks, why he loved me but only inside safe limits. I asked her why she left when she could have stayed and played the role too, and she said because she realized she was disappearing, slowly adjusting herself to fit a plan that was never hers, and she didn't want to wake up one day not recognizing her own thoughts. After we hung up, I sat in silence, realizing I was standing exactly where she once stood, only I had more to lose: years, memories, a life built around a version of love that had never been free. And for the first time I asked myself the question I had been avoiding since that first message: did I want the truth, or did I want the comfort of the lie? I started paying attention in ways I never had before, not to catch him cheating or lying in obvious ways, but to see the structure underneath his behavior, the patterns, the control, how every decision seemed calm but calculated, and once I saw it I couldn't unsee it. When we went out to dinner, he subtly chose places where he was known, where the staff greeted him by name. When we attended events, he positioned us so cameras caught us laughing, touching, leaning in at the right moments, and I realized I had been performing without knowing it, reacting naturally inside a script he already memorized. One evening I asked him casually if he ever regretted how fast our relationship moved, and he smiled in that smooth way that used to reassure me and said timing is everything, and something about that answer felt rehearsed. I asked if he loved me or the life we built, and he laughed softly, kissed my forehead, and said those two things were the same, but that response made my chest ache. Because love shouldn't need to merge with utility to exist. That night I checked the files again and found a note I hadn't noticed before, a contingency section outlining scenarios: illness, scandal, emotional instability, and recommended responses, including temporary separation strategies designed to protect his image while maintaining public sympathy. I closed the laptop feeling dizzy, because even my potential breakdown had already been planned for, and that's when I realized I wasn't just married to a man, I was married to a machine that knew how to survive without caring who it crushed. The next day I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked him directly, not accusing, not emotional, just quiet and simple. I asked him if he ever felt like our marriage was part of something bigger than just us, and for the first time in 6 years he hesitated. It was barely noticeable, but I saw it, a fraction of a second where his face reset. Then he smiled and asked why I would think that, and I told him I sometimes felt like we were always being watched, measured, evaluated, and he laughed it off, said I was overthinking, that success always comes with pressure, but his hand tightened around his coffee mug, and that tiny detail told me everything. Later that night he asked if I was happy, and the way he asked wasn't concern, it was assessment, like he was checking a dashboard, and I answered honestly. I said I wasn't sure anymore. His expression stayed calm but his questions became more specific. What exactly made me feel that way? When did it start? Was there anyone influencing me? And in that moment I realized he wasn't afraid of losing me emotionally. He was afraid of me becoming unpredictable. I told him I just needed space to think, and he agreed instantly, too instantly, suggesting a short trip, time apart framed as self-care, already packaged in language that sounded supportive, but I could hear the strategy underneath it, and when he went to bed I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, understanding that if I wanted to leave, I wouldn't be escaping a man, I'd be stepping out of a system that was designed to pull me back in. The next morning I packed a small bag and told him I was going to stay with a friend for a few days, and he nodded like he had already rehearsed that moment. He told me to take my time, to rest, to remember how strong we were together, and the calmness in his voice made my skin crawl because it felt like permission rather than concern. The second I left the house my phone started lighting up, not from him, but from numbers I didn't recognize, polite messages asking if everything was okay, offering support, reminding me how stressful change can be, and I knew instantly they weren't friends. They were safeguards, the firm working quietly to stabilize their asset. I didn't reply. Instead I drove to a cheap motel 2 towns away because I needed somewhere no one had optimized for me, and that's where the woman called me again. She told me this was the phase where they would try to soften me, confuse me, make me doubt my own clarity. She said if that didn't work they would shift the narrative, paint me as overwhelmed, emotional, unstable, not cruelly, just enough to protect him, and hearing that scared me more than anger ever could, because it meant the story of my life could be rewritten without my consent. I asked her how she escaped and she said she didn't win. She just disappeared before they could define her. She changed jobs, cities, habits, everything. And for the first time I understood the real cost of leaving, not divorce papers or heartbreak, but losing the version of myself that had been built inside his world. And as I sat on that motel bed staring at the patterned carpet I realized staying would mean slowly erasing myself, but leaving meant becoming someone unrecognizable, and I didn't know which version of me I was brave enough to live as. I spent the next 2 days in that motel trying to think, trying to untangle myself from the life I thought was mine. I didn't call him, I didn't open emails, I just let the reality sink in, and every time I closed my eyes I saw the files, the spreadsheets, the charts with my name, my habits, my reactions, and I realized he hadn't needed to lie to me. He had simply built a life I would never question. I called the woman again because I needed guidance. She told me to be strategic, to gather proof, to understand the system before making a move. She said the first mistake women make is emotion, the second is haste, and then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Whatever you do, he will always plan 3 steps ahead," and I finally understood why every anniversary, every holiday, every smile I thought was mine had been anticipated, calculated, designed to keep me compliant. That night I went back to the house under the pretext of picking up things I left behind, and the moment I walked through the door I felt it. The air was perfectly balanced, lights dimmed just slightly, soft music playing somewhere I couldn't see, and he appeared in the kitchen, smiling that same calm, perfect smile, asking if the trip had done me good, and I realized he didn't need to control me in the obvious ways because I had already been trained to move inside his boundaries, to think within the lines he had drawn, and I felt a mix of rage and fear because the man I married wasn't even human in the way I understood. He was a carefully constructed life strategy, and I was inside it. That night I didn't argue, I didn't accuse, I didn't cry. I looked at him and for the first time I saw the whole picture clearly, not a villain, not a monster, but a man who chose optimization over connection and called it success, and I realized the most dangerous part wasn't what he did, it was how normal it felt once you were inside it. I went to bed next to him knowing something he didn't know yet, that I had already stepped outside the role. Because the moment you see the script, you stop being a character. A week later I didn't leave dramatically, I didn't disappear overnight. I did the one thing his system wasn't built for. I became unpredictable. I spoke to a lawyer quietly, I secured my finances, I documented everything, and when I finally told him I was done, truly done, there was no anger in his eyes, only calculation, like he was already adjusting the narrative. But this time it didn't matter, because the story of my life was no longer his to manage. I lost comfort, I lost status, I lost the version of myself that fit perfectly into his world, but I gained something that can't be renewed, extended, or negotiated, my autonomy, my messy, unoptimized, fully human freedom. And if you're listening to this and something in your life feels too controlled, too polished, too perfectly calm, trust that feeling, because love should never feel like a strategy. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what you would have done in my place.